My name is Naomi Prescott, 30 years old, born and raised in a Gothic Revival mansion in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood on the west side of Philadelphia. The house stood beneath towering oak trees with vaulted windows and gray slate rooftops, looking as though it had been carved from a 19th century painting. To outsiders, it may have seemed somber and outdated, but to me, it was a miniature world where every door, every brick, bore the imprint of my father's hands and my childhood. My father, Benjamin Prescott, was a renowned architect specializing in the restoration of historic structures. He was a man devoted to detail, depth, and anything with a soul. While other children were taken to parks or movie theaters, I was led through olive-tiled hallways while he explained the meaning behind each fading pattern beneath the dust. Every Sunday morning, he brewed coffee, played jazz on an old cassette player, and guided me through each room, his hand gliding along the wall as if reading the heartbeat of the home. "Naomi, do you see this?" he would say as he brought me up to the attic. "This column was hand-carved in 1883. They don't make things like this anymore. One day this house will be yours, and it will be your duty to protect it, as part of our family's bloodline." He didn't have to say it twice. Each time he spoke, his voice carried a conviction so sincere, it felt like he was laying the foundation for my future. Even as a child, I knew this mansion wasn't just a place to live. It was a promise, a legacy, proof that the Prescotts had lived, built, and died within these walls. My mother, Alice, passed away from a brain tumor when I was 10. I remember her sitting on the porch with a basket of yarn, her long silver hair always tied back with a chestnut ribbon. She was the only one who could make my father stop working and sit down to dinner on time. After she was gone, everything shifted. The house grew quieter, and my father, though still gentle, was no longer the man who laughed as I danced across the kitchen floor. Even so, he never let me feel alone. In every draft he sketched at his ebony desk, I saw myself, tucked into those hallways, those arches, even the stone bathtub in my mother's old bedroom. "You're the only one who understands the soul of this house," he told me in the later years, his voice lower. "People can buy it, rent it, even tear it down, but only you can keep it as it truly is." I didn't know that would be the last time he spoke of it. 3 years ago, while I was working as a preservation consultant in Chicago, he called me on a cool October evening. His voice was tired and scattered. "I'm just a little under the weather, probably the flu," he said, but I could hear the tremble in his breath and the deep cough that scraped from somewhere deep in his chest. Just weeks later, I received the call. Late-stage liver cancer. By the time I returned to Philadelphia, the mansion was no longer lit each night. It felt as though the house itself was waiting for its final guardian to say goodbye. I stayed through my father's last 6 months. We ate breakfast in the kitchen where my mother once baked blueberry muffins. We read old letters he'd kept in a tin box beneath the attic floorboards. And each afternoon, I pushed his wheelchair along the veranda as he pointed to every corner, saying, "That ridge, keep it. Don't replace it. Your grandfather carved that with his bare hands." I didn't cry when he passed. I simply stood in the main hall, looking up at the chandelier hanging from the tall ceiling, remembering the final words he whispered the night before he left. "Don't let anyone take this house from you, Naomi. No matter what they say, don't let go." I met her that summer when I was 17, right after my high school graduation. Dad said she was just an old friend from his architecture days at Penn State, who had recently moved to Bryn Mawr and reconnected with him at a conference. But the way he pressed his shirts crisp, wore that overpowering peppermint aftershave every time he went out, and scheduled long cleanups before the grass even brushed our knees. All signs pointed to the fact that this friend didn't just happen to show up. Her name was Meredith. Meredith Lansing, 44 years old, a luxury real estate broker with a voice that mixed the Midwest with TV-learned enunciation. She pulled up in a glossy black Range Rover, nude stilettos, and an ivory blazer so smooth I swear not a wrinkle dared to exist. Her face was tightened just enough to make age a mystery, but her eyes, God, those eyes, gave everything away. Sharp, quick, calculated. Oh, you must be little Naomi, Meredith said when I opened the door, flashing a smile just wide enough to show off a set of perfectly whitened teeth. Ben talks about you all the time. You look just like your mother. I didn't shake her hand. I simply stepped back with a polite smile, letting the stranger pass through the doorway of a home that had never had a space for her. 4 months later, they got married. Not the small, intimate garden wedding my father once said he'd always imagined. No, Meredith was not the type for embroidered tablecloths or glasses of local wine with preservationist friends. The ceremony took place at a boutique hotel downtown where champagne spilled from towered glasses and their names were embossed in gold on the menu card. I wore my dress, stood near the window, and watched my father, the same man who once spent hours showing me how to build model houses, slide a ring onto the finger of a woman who had never once climbed into the attic where he kept my mother's old sketches. After their honeymoon, Meredith moved in, and everything started changing. The large oak-framed mirror in the foyer was taken down and replaced with a sleek slab of modern silvered glass. She'd hired someone to strip the classic floral wallpaper from the dining room where my mom had celebrated her last Christmas, and painted it with what she called a neutral, more sophisticated gray. The walnut bookcase that reached the ceiling in the library where 3 generations of our family's journals, manuscripts, and photos once lived was cleared out in one unannounced afternoon. When I found out and asked her, Meredith shrugged. I sent them all to storage. No one's read them in almost a decade. We need to let the space breathe a little. I kept calm. But when I searched for my mom's record player in the living room and only found a tiny Bluetooth speaker on the shelf, I walked straight into my father's study, closed the door, and yelled, "You're letting her erase Mom from this house?" My father looked at me like he had just woken from a long dream. "Nay, me. You're overreacting. Meredith just wants the house to feel more updated. Time moves on." I let out a bitter laugh. "And Mom? Does she deserve to be updated out of your memory too?" After that, I stopped coming home. I moved closer to my office, into a small apartment near Rittenhouse Square. Though my dad still called each month, the conversations became awkward and fragmented. He tiptoed around my questions about the house. Even his words felt filtered, like Meredith was editing him in real time. But no matter how much I avoided it, there were moments I couldn't escape. Last December, I was invited to his 60th birthday party. I stood in the foyer looking up at the ceiling where a French crystal chandelier once hung, now replaced with minimalist LED strips. The family photos had all been swapped for pictures of just Dad and Meredith. No trace of Mom, no trace of me. I stepped outside onto the veranda where my dad was chatting with guests and said just one thing: "This house isn't home anymore." Meredith watched me leave. No goodbye, just a subtle glance, sharp enough to let me know she believed she'd won. And maybe she thought she had. I never went back. Not until the day she called, cold as a stockbroker reading a crash report. "I've sold the house, Naomi. You need to learn your place." I first started feeling like an unwelcome guest in the very house I was born in on Christmas, the year I turned 22. I had just finished final exams at Columbia, my backpack heavy with textbooks, heart full of the usual excitement as I caught the earliest train back to Philadelphia. I'd texted Dad the night before. Coming home tomorrow, should get there around 3 p.m., but by noon the next day, I still hadn't heard back. When the train pulled into 30th Street Station, I walked under the light snow dusting the sidewalks and stopped in front of the familiar black iron gate. No wreath, no hanging lights, no tree in the window like every year before. I rang the bell, no answer. 30 minutes later, my father finally appeared, tired expression, phone in hand, still wearing a pullover sweater with the price tag dangling. He cracked the door open, looking at me with the strange uncertainty of someone trying to place a name. "Naomi, why didn't you call ahead?" he asked, his voice sliding across the wooden floor like ice. "I texted you last night," I replied, trying to smile. "I thought I could come home without asking." I stepped inside and felt the chill from the house bite harder than the winter wind. Meredith appeared on the staircase, lips painted in deep red, holding a glass of white wine. She looked at me like I had interrupted something important. Oh, Naomi, what a surprise. He said you were busy with your thesis? Meredith turned to my father. I tightened my grip on my bag strap. I came home to spend Christmas with Dad. I didn't know I needed to RSVP. Ah, she laughed, a dry, brittle laugh. We booked a trip to Vermont, a private holiday getaway, meant to leave you a note. You were going to leave me alone on Christmas? I turned to my father. He looked away. You're grown now, Naomi. Meredith thought it might be better if we had some space this year. Next year will be different. The next year wasn't different. That year, I got a text on the morning of December 23rd. Naomi, we're not doing anything big this year. You should stay in New York and focus on work. I let out a bitter laugh. From then on, I spent New Year's, Easter, even the 4th of July with friends, coworkers, or Aunt Grace, my mother's younger sister, who lived in Annapolis. She always kept a room ready, a mug of hot cocoa waiting, and never once asked why I wasn't going home. She simply said, some people live in a house and forget how to protect what's precious inside. You're different, Naomi. You understand the value of memory. In the years that followed, I still tried to stay in touch with Dad. I sent him pictures of the projects I worked on. Historic homes restored in Charleston, a small theater preserved brick by brick in Hudson. His replies were always short. Well done. No phone calls, no invitations. Then one day, I found out Meredith had changed the landline number. My father's voicemail box was gone. Emails bounced back with recipient mailbox full. I tried texting, no reply. A few months later, I saw a post on Meredith's LinkedIn. We've just completed the renovation of a classic Gothic home, upgrading it to modern living standards with a fully open concept ground floor. The featured photo was our living room. Where once stood my mother's red velvet armchairs with carved wooden arms, there was now a stark white space with low-back couches and cold metal pendant lights. The library had been gutted, replaced by a built-in wall bar. The mahogany staircase was now tempered glass. I gripped my phone, then laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't need explaining. I didn't know if Dad had agreed or been manipulated, but one thing I knew for sure. Meredith didn't want me in that house anymore. She built invisible walls. Through silence, white paint, and lines like, he's busy, Meredith hosting. We're traveling for business. She didn't need to kick me out, she just needed to make me feel like I no longer belonged. And then 3 months before that I've sold the house phone call, I received a message from an unknown number. Just 2 lines. Your father isn't well. If you want to see him, come soon. Signed, James, Mr. Prescott's former assistant. I didn't have time to think. I booked a flight to Philadelphia that night. And that's when I stepped into the house for the first time in 3 years and realized I wasn't the only one pushed out of the family. So was my father. When I stepped into my father's old study, the one that used to smell like fresh paper and polished mahogany, I almost didn't recognize the man lying in the recliner near the window. He was so thin, his cheeks had sunk in, his hair a snowy white, and his skin sallow under the pale light of the same desk lamp I had repaired for him when I was 15. But his eyes, those were still my father's. Some part of this house still hadn't been erased by Meredith. Naomi, he said, his voice raspy but clear. You came. I didn't respond right away. I walked closer, sat beside him, and gently took his hand. Bony, dry, with knuckles that once gripped technical pencils every day. I'm here, Dad. Why didn't you call me? He looked out the window where withered winter trees were shedding their leaves like time falling to the ground. I wasn't allowed. Meredith thought you were busy. The answer made me grip his hand tighter. Too busy to be told my dad is dying? He closed his eyes and shook his head faintly. I'm sorry. I should have tried harder. A soft knock interrupted us. Meredith peeked in, her smile as tight as a mask. Oh, Naomi. I thought you were staying at a hotel. Your dad needs rest now." I stood, positioning myself between her and him. "I'm staying every day from now on." She shrugged, her eyes betraying her displeasure, though her voice stayed polite. "As you wish, just don't overstimulate him." The door clicked shut. I didn't have to look to know she was heading to the kitchen to make a phone call or cancel lunch plans with her golf club friends. From this point on, I would decide what happened in this house, at least around my father. I called in an extended leave from the New York office and moved temporarily back into my old bedroom on the second floor. Thankfully, Meredith hadn't yet converted it into a sauna like she bragged online. I arranged for a private nurse, prepared all my dad's meals myself, and recorded every piece of advice he gave each afternoon. "Naomi," he called me one weekend morning after finishing half a smoothie I made. "Come here, I want you to know something." I sat beside the bed. He slowly reached toward the bottom drawer of his desk, the one locked for years. The key was hidden among his pens. Inside, he retrieved a folder, wrapped in worn leather, trimmed in brass, with a small label reading, "Prescott Holdings, Confidential. Guard this well. When I'm gone, bring it to George Weller at Weller & Howe, 38 Maple Street." I flipped open the first page, trust fund papers, contracts, notarized legal documents. "Meredith doesn't know about this?" I asked, my palms suddenly cold. He nodded slowly. "I set up the trust 6 years ago, before I married her. I couldn't let her touch this house, Naomi. I couldn't let our family's legacy be scrubbed away with white paint and cheap laminate floors." I went quiet, my throat tightening. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked at me, eyes heavy with regret. "Because I was afraid. I thought she'd just needed a sense of security. But I was wrong. She doesn't need this house. She needs control." From that day on, he talked to me more. On afternoons when he was lucid, we revisited memories. The time he took me to a museum and showed me how to identify 19th century stonework. The night I had a high fever and he stayed up reading to me. The time my mom laid chocolate chip cookies all over the kitchen just to catch me sneaking snacks. "All my memories are with you and this house," he said. "Not Meredith, not anyone else." I wanted to bottle that moment, but time doesn't wait. Just 3 weeks later, he started losing track of the days. One morning, I found him silently sitting up, holding a dusty frame of me and my mom on the front porch. "Promise me," he said, eyes misty, "when it's over, don't let her sell this house. This is legacy, this is blood, this is a promise." I nodded, tears rolling down my neck. "I promise." Then, on a night in early January, so cold the window panes frosted white, my father passed away. And I didn't just lose a parent. I lost the final shield between me and the storm named Meredith Lansing. I was never ready for that. But my father, he had been ready for me. The will reading took place on a damp, chilly afternoon at Attorney Weller's office, inside a red brick federal-style building on Maple Street that once served as a bank in the previous century. The conference room was spacious, lined with walnut floors and adorned with dark, moody portraits that only heightened the tension in the air. I arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress, holding the folder my father had given me. George Weller, my father's trusted attorney for over 30 years, nodded a greeting, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. A flicker of caution, maybe guilt. Then Meredith walked in, 5 minutes late, in a charcoal cashmere coat, designer sunglasses, and high heels that clicked sharply across the floor as if she were arriving at an auction, not a will reading. At her side was a young man in an expensive suit, clutching a document case, presumably her personal lawyer. "Naomi?" Meredith tilted her head, her wine-red lips curled upward. "I knew you'd show. After all, people do get curious when their name is in a will, don't they?" I said nothing. I looked straight at Mr. Weller. "Shall we begin?" He opened a file, his voice calm, formal, and distant. "This is the legally binding last will and testament of Mr. Benjamin Prescott, signed on October 18th of last year, with notarization and 2 witnesses present." He began listing charitable donations to the Pennsylvania Architectural Preservation Society and a vintage Ford Thunderbird left to my father's best friend. I listened in silence, knowing my part would come. For Miss Naomi Prescott, Mr. Weller continued, Mr. Benjamin bequeaths a cash sum of $50,000, along with personal memorabilia, including family photos, technical drawing tools, and personal journals. My heart skipped a beat. A heavy silence fell in the room like plaster crumbling from the walls. And the remainder of the estate, including real property, investment portfolio, savings accounts, and full ownership of Prescott and Langston, is left to his wife, Mrs. Meredith Lansing Prescott. Meredith placed a hand to her chest, tilting her head in a performance-worthy gesture. Her lawyer whispered something calculated into her ear, while I heard nothing. My father had promised. He had said, "Don't let her sell this house." And yet here we were. Every stone, every roof tile, every fragment of our family's legacy, now in the hands of a woman who had never once felt the heartbeat of its walls. Mr. Weller looked up, his eyes meeting mine, this time the guilt unmistakable. Miss Naomi, do you have any questions? I shook my head, lips stiff as stone. No, I understand. Meredith stood, her heels slicing the silence. She glanced at me, then turned to her lawyer. We can begin transfer paperwork by next week. I'd like it listed by early next week. Raymond Realty, the man asked. Of course, opening at $3.5 million. And hire someone to stage the living room. That wall color is far too cold, Meredith added with a grin. I think cream tones will help buyers visualize better. I left the conference room with fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. That night I sat in Aunt Grace's guest room, staring at the box of keepsakes Mr. Weller had handed me, a plain wooden box holding no monetary value. But when I opened the lid, memories surged like a flood. There was the steel ruler etched with Prescott's name, a soft leather notebook filled with creased sketches, a photo of my mother in a white blouse laughing on the front steps, and a single envelope, pale yellow, in my father's handwriting. Naomi, open after the will is read. I opened the letter, and after reading just the first line, a chill ran down my spine. You'll think I betrayed you, but I need you to trust me one last time. Meet with Mr. Weller alone this coming Tuesday morning. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and took a deep breath. That Tuesday morning, Mr. Weller's office felt nothing like it had during the will reading. Gone was the cold formality. Instead, as I stepped through the frosted glass door, his assistant stood up immediately, smiling with urgency. Miss Naomi, please go in. Mr. Weller's expecting you. Mr. Weller wasn't behind his desk like usual. He was standing beside an old filing cabinet, holding a thick envelope sealed with red wax, the kind I'd only seen in documentaries about royal inheritances. Naomi, he turned to me, his gaze warmer than I'd ever seen. Your father prepared this more thoroughly than we realized. I sat in the chair across from him, heart pounding. Before we begin, he said, I need you to confirm something. Do you remember the file your father gave you before he passed? I nodded and pulled the brown leather folder from my bag, placing it on the table. He called it Prescott Holdings, told me to give it to you only after the will was read. Mr. Weller gently opened the folder, flipping through a few pages as if to confirm what he already knew. Then he set it aside and opened the red wax envelope. Inside was a copy of a property transfer contract, nearly 30 pages long, accompanied by notarized addenda and official documentation from the Philadelphia Land Registry. Is Naomi? Mr. Weller said slowly. The house on Oak Ridge Street wasn't included in the estate assets divided in the will because it hasn't been in your father's name since 2017. I jerked my head up. What? In March of 2017, 9 months before he married Meredith Lansing, Mr. Benjamin Prescott transferred the legal ownership of the property into an irrevocable trust. The trust is called the Prescott Family Trust, and the sole beneficiary upon his death is you. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. That means It means Meredith has no legal claim to the house, Mr. Weller nodded. Legally, she is occupying a property she does not own, and if she attempts to sell, transfer, or alter any structure on that property, such action would be nullified. I leaned back in my chair. It felt like falling off a cliff, but being caught at the last moment by a rope my father had quietly secured. Why didn't he say anything? Why not spell it out in the will? Feared Meredith would retaliate, Mr. Weller explained. She's clever, well-connected, and not above manipulation. If she knew the house was left to you, she could have dragged you into litigation for years. So, he chose to let things play out, as you witnessed. So she would reveal her greed. I suddenly remembered Meredith's smug smile last week at the office when she announced she'd redo the entire exterior to raise the selling price. Is there a way to stop her from selling it? I asked, my voice low but firmer than ever. Here's no need to stop her, Mr. Weller replied with a thin smile. You are the only one legally allowed to sell. I've already contacted the Land Records Office. Ownership has been updated. Any potential transaction will be halted as soon as the buyer sees the registered owner is Naomi Prescott, not Meredith Lansing. I let out a laugh, light but full of relief. She's going to lose her mind. Probably, he nodded. But you should be careful. She won't take this quietly. I sat in silence for a few minutes, tracing the ridges of the document cover. Outside the window, snow had started to fall. Part of me ached that my father had to arrange all of this in silence, but the other part felt deep admiration. He hadn't just protected me, he had left behind one final lesson. Justice doesn't come from a will, it comes from seeing ahead and placing trust in the right hands. I looked up at Mr. Weller. What happens now? He closed the folder, eyes resolute. Now, we wait for Meredith to try and sell the house, and when she walks into the notary's office, we'll be there with all the paperwork and the truth. I stood, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own family. Morton and Ash title transfer sat on the 8th floor of a newly built glass building in Center City, Philadelphia. Mr. Weller and I arrived at 5 minutes to 10, right on time. He adjusted his collar, his voice calm but sharp as steel. Let me do the talking. But if she gets too smug, look her straight in the eye and say, "That house was never yours." I nodded, gripping the case that held every trust document. Inside me was a storm, not fear, but the kind of stillness that comes when waiting reaches its breaking point. As we stepped into the large meeting room, lined with white marble, Meredith was already seated with 2 realtors, the buyers and her new attorney, a slick-haired man with a fire engine red tie, laughing loudly with the couple. The moment she saw me, Meredith froze. Her expression changed so quickly it was chilling. From surprise to icy indifference, then feigned composure, as if I were a speck of dust on her hem. "Naomi, I didn't expect you here. This is just an internal procedure. It has nothing to do with you." Before I could respond, Mr. Weller stepped forward, placed the case on the table, and nodded to the notary. "Edward Weller, legal representative for Miss Naomi Prescott. And I'm afraid we have a serious issue." Meredith let out a scoffing laugh. "Another dramatic performance? Mr. Weller, I'm afraid you've misunderstood the terms of the inheritance. The assets were transferred to me according to the will. Everyone here knows that." "I'm not referring to the assets covered in the will, Mrs. Lansing," Mr. Weller said, his voice low but crisp. "I'm referring to the property at 17 Oak Ridge Street, the one you're attempting to sell this morning." Silence fell. The buyers, an older, respectable-looking couple, exchanged confused glances. Meredith clutched her purse strap tightly. "That's my home. I've lived there for 6 years. Don't tell me you're going to dispute that." Mr. Weller opened the file, pulling out a copy of the trust documents, along with a notarized deed dated March 12, 2017. "This is the deed transferring ownership of the house from Mr. Benjamin Prescott into the Prescott Family Trust, an irrevocable trust established 9 months before his marriage to you. The sole beneficiary is Miss Naomi Prescott. You were never the legal owner of that home, not for a single day." Meredith's lawyer lunged for the documents, flipping through the pages like he'd been electrocuted. That's impossible. We've verified the title under Benjamin Prescott's name. And that was your mistake, Mr. Weller cut in. The property is owned by the trust entity, not by him personally. If you search under the wrong name, it doesn't appear. And of course, Meredith was never listed as a beneficiary. Meredith shot up. This is fraud. Richard left me everything. Then I suggest you reviewed the legal definition of everything, Mr. Weller said, his gaze as sharp as a blade. A will only governs assets legally owned by the deceased at the time of death. This house was not among them. The buyers began gathering their documents. We don't want to be involved in any legal mess, the wife whispered. I thought this was her house. I stepped forward, opened my case, and laid down the original deed showing trust ownership, right in the center of the table. You tried to sell a house that never belonged to you. If you want to sue, go ahead, but you'll have to explain why you took a deposit and promised a property you had no right to sell. Meredith trembled. She turned to her lawyer, pale as chalk. Do something. You're my attorney, he stammered. Mrs. Lansing, if these documents are legitimate, I'm afraid you have no legal standing, and if you proceed, it could be considered property fraud. I looked at her, not to retaliate, but to witness the moment her mask of power crumbled. You asked why I came here today, Meredith, I said firmly. Because I made a promise to my father. I promised I'd protect that house from you, and today I kept that promise. Meredith said nothing. She collapsed into her chair, hand trembling as she reached for her water, only to spill it all over her skirt. No one helped, no one comforted her. The room now held only the sound of rustling documents and the wind whistling against the glass. 2 days after the confrontation at the title office, I returned to the house on Oak Ridge Street, alone. In my hand was the official deed, and around my neck hung the silver key engraved BP, Benjamin Prescott. The gate had been relocked with a new padlock, but I called in my own locksmith. They changed it out in under 10 minutes. Meredith wasn't there when I stepped inside. She was in Atlantic City, according to the former housekeeper I'd stayed in touch with for 7 years. The house was strangely quiet, as if it too had been waiting to be cleansed. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter, the place that once was the heart of the home. Meredith, you have 2 weeks to collect your belongings and vacate. I will not sue you for fraud. I will not pursue the income you collected from illegally renting out the guest room, but if you are still here after 14 days, I will enforce a legal eviction. Naomi. I didn't need her signature. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. 3 days later, a moving company showed up. Meredith didn't pack a single thing herself. She paid others to box up the items she claimed were hers, leaving the rest behind like it meant nothing. She didn't say a word, only shot me a look as I stood at the bottom of the steps, gray coat on, hands in my pockets, silently watching it all roll out piece by piece. When the last truck pulled away from the gate, I stood in the main hall, feeling like I had finally closed the door on a nightmare that had lasted for years. I didn't scream. I didn't wave papers in the air. I didn't throw a party. I simply pulled the key from my collar and inserted it into the old lock of my father's study, the one Meredith had once claimed was jammed, and sealed off with duct tape. It clicked open. No sound, but something inside my chest cracked wide. I flipped on the light. The room had been nearly preserved. Oak shelves heavy with time, architectural sketches rolled into metal tubes, and a wooden box on the desk. I lifted the lid. Inside were my father's journals. At least 10 of them, leather-bound, dated from 1992 up to 3 months before his death. I picked one and flipped through it. His handwriting was just as I remembered. Slightly right-leaning, steady, with deep grooves where he pressed the fountain pen too hard. Naomi's growing up, she's starting to ask about classic roof structures. I've never been prouder. Meredith wants to replace all the lighting in the house. I said no. Naomi would hate that. Tomorrow I sign the deed over to the trust. I can't let Meredith sell what 3 generations have protected. I stopped at that page, closed the journal, and laid my hand over the cover like a silent thank you. Thank you for not forgetting Mom, not forgetting me, not forgetting yourself. The next afternoon, I called the Caldwells, the couple Meredith had tried to sell the house to. They were surprised, then moved when I offered to sell at the exact same price as before. No commission, no agent fee, no staging. We still want the house, Mrs. Caldwell said over the phone. We want our kids to grow up somewhere with history, with soul. If you're really willing, I'm not just willing, I replied. I believe this is the right thing to do. We agreed on an 8-week transfer timeline. I would have time to collect the items that mattered, restore a few architectural details Meredith had ruined, and most importantly, locate the old wall safe hidden behind the painting of water lilies Meredith had hung to cover up my parents' wedding photo. The painting had been nailed in deeply. I had to get a specialist to remove it carefully. Behind the panel, just as my father had described in his letter, was a coded safe. I entered my birth date. November. The door clicked open. Inside was a navy velvet box containing my mother's sapphire jewelry, the same necklace she wore on their 10th anniversary. There was also a stack of documents, my birth certificate, my parents' marriage license, and a handwritten letter from my grandfather to my father, calling the house the lifeblood of the Prescott legacy. I hugged the box to my chest and didn't cry. That night, I sat on the floor of my old bedroom. I didn't turn the lights on, just let the streetlight cast soft shadows through the curtains. I opened my father's journal and read the last pages. If Naomi is reading this, I'm likely no longer here, but remember, no one can take from you what you guard with love. No one can uproot you if you know where you come from. I closed my eyes. Not from pain, but because finally I had closed a chapter with kindness, not vengeance. And that's how I reclaimed everything, not by fighting harder, but by never letting go. My story isn't just about a house. It's about reclaiming my worth after years of being pushed aside by my own family. In real life, some people will do everything they can to erase you from what's rightfully yours, through power, manipulation, or silence. But if you hold on to your faith, your memory, and your determination, no one can take that away from you. Because true inheritance isn't measured by assets. It's knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define it. What do you think about Naomi's journey? Would you have the courage to do what she did if you were in her place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful family stories.